there's a huge difference in the payout that a charter team receives versus somebody who may be in the race without a charter.
I'm definitely team chaos, but Talladega was almost even too much for me.
I do enjoy getting to travel the country like we do, but it is certainly nice to sleep in your own bed.
You know, you never know when you're just going to have an off weekend.
I've kind of gotten the ability to have the platform that I want, and it is my platform, and I can speak to whatever I feel like talking about.
We were in the mix, and it makes it a lot more fun when you're in the mix than you are just, struggling and trying to figure out what direction to go.
Yeah, it's tough, and sorry for being bouncy, the roads here. If you have, the all-you-can-eat buffet every single day of the week, people are going to get tired of it, right? So if it's a special thing, I think people get more excited for it.
Hi, Bo!
Raise your hand up so she can see it. There you go.
So even as a I think it was,
All right. Thanks, buddy.
Very head-scratching why at the beginning all four of us just went instantly straight to the back. We just really struggled.
Welcome on to the Backstretch on News 5's Heather Williams, and I'm definitely team chaos, but Talladega was almost even too much for me. For starters, you had the largest wreck in Talladega history, 24 cars or something like that, redefining the definition of the big one. But then also you had what happened afterwards, where teams were lobbying to not be towed, where some people were forced out of the race. Some people just stood their ground and got to get back in the race, got towed back to pit road. There's just a lot going on in that race. Then to top it all off, a non-playoff driver in Ricky Stenhouse Jr. won. Now, honestly, it was bound to happen that Stenhouse was going to win a race like that at Talladega, specifically because he is so good at that racetrack. But it doesn't take away from the fact that it was just pure chaos. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about with our crew chief, Chris Carrier, today. We'll also talk a little bit more about the ongoing litigation between 2311 Front Row Motorsports and NASCAR, but not so much about the litigation, more of an explanation as to why these charters are so important, why Michael Jordan and Bob Jenkins and Denny Hamlin are fighting so hard for these charters, for this monetary value that's attached to those charters. So interesting conversation with Chris. And of course, we will look ahead to the cutoff race at the Roval. And speaking of that race, our guest this week is Tyler Reddick. He sat on the pole last year at the Roval. He's pretty good on road courses, one of the better drivers in the garage area on the road courses. So he's got great insight, not only about that track, about the reconfiguration of the track, but also with only William Byron locked in heading into this weekend. He has great insight about whether you race for points or whether you race for the win, what he's going to do, what he thinks other drivers are going to do. So it's going to be a great conversation with Tyler. Let's get going. Joining us now is our crew chief, Chris Carrier, who is also the crew chief for the number 75 Food Country truck in the Craftsman Truck Series. Chris, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. gets the win at Talladega, making him the second straight non-playoff winner and the 18th winner this season. This is becoming a trend for the sport, but is the parity good for the sport?
I think it's very good for the sport. I'm really kind of enjoying this a little bit. We also had some of that in the Truck Series and Xfinity Series. I'm not sure about, but I just, it's a reminder to me that even though these teams, drivers, everybody involved in all these teams that aren't in the playoffs, that don't make it and so forth, they don't quit. There's still a lot out there. It's not just about the chase, even though that's the priority to NASCAR and the thing everybody wants to focus on and get the most attention to. But there's still, if there's 12 in the playoffs, that means there's like 30 others out there that are still racing for what they can get. Each race from the rest of the season on, there's still quite a few races left. And, they're out there digging just as hard as they can. They're drivers, they're crew chiefs, they're fabricators, they're mechanics, they're race engineers, the whole staff at those places, including Ricky Stenhouse and his team, Tad Geschecter, a good friend of mine, the owner of that team. And they're, good for them. good for them. I love it when people are out there and they just don't quit. And they're still, you know, winning a race is a huge deal in any of the top three, so really anything, even not only the top three series, but even when you're racing Kingsport or whatever in late models, winning a race nowadays is not easy. It's hard. It's very difficult. And for them to get one, Ricky Stenhouse is a proven speedway competitive driver, and he's been in that car for that team and won races. So, you know what? There they are, still plugging away. I love it. I think you might have more.
Well, speaking of the end of that race, there was a little bit of chaos at the end of that race and a lot of questions about the damaged vehicle policy. Now, I know that NASCAR met with the crew chiefs on Thursday to maybe clarify some of that, but first of all, chaos, we could talk about that. But second of all, is it right, is it good for NASCAR to be kind of changing their policy on how they treat these teams mid-season, even if the way they were doing it before was wrong? Because I think people feel like what they were doing was wrong, but is it okay to then just change and just change?
To answer that question first, I'm going to say no. I've heard Denny Hamlin say, if you're going to have a rule, go by the rule. Don't change it right in the middle of the rule or when the rule's being played out, and I agree with that. Don't change the terms of something right in the middle of the game. I don't think that's good at all for any results. But you know, I'm not going to candy coat this. I feel like at the end of the day, I think there's too many rules. And when you talk about damaged vehicle policy, the whole aspect of that, the whole target of that was because, I'm going to say it, a lot of the Cup drivers complained because they got tired of passing cars in a 500-lap race or a 400-mile race or whatever that, you know, were way damaged and looked like junkyard dogs out there.
Well, and from a safety standpoint, there's no reason to have them out there. I get that.
That's true. This is true, but that came from that, and I don't disagree with just that part of it, but they made it really difficult to understand. I'm sorry. I deal with it on the Truck Series side and all the rules and the time limits and what you can do and can't do. My gosh, I think, you know, I'm trying to find Perry Mason to go to pit road with me, you know, to understand what's going on. And I think there's just too much. You know, I don't know if you could simplify. And here I am throwing answers out. If you just say, hey, once you get so many laps down in a race, you park, period. And I think that would be way easier for everybody to understand. Now, you'd have to have some do's and don'ts for pit road repair. You know, you don't want people changing the gear or changing the motor on pit road. That's obvious, and I think that'd be easy. But just to me, it just seems like that whole mess, and it was a mess, and it continues to be a mess, and a lot of conversation and a lot of anger, from what I can hear, is because nobody really knew where the rules were and where they ended and what. And I heard,
well, who could be towed and who can't be towed?
Who can be towed?
I heard somebody on Sirius, and God loves some of those callers on Sirius, but I actually heard someone that had a really good idea, which was just tow everybody to their box. You tell them what they can and can't fix. As soon as they get to their box, the clock starts. When that time's up, you're done. Then don't let NASCAR decide your car's too damaged or not too damaged or whatever. You have a certain time, you have a certain speed that you have to maintain, and if you do it, or you don't, and you're out.
I think there's simpler. I think a lot of things that we've done, and I'll say NASCAR as a whole, and that includes me, a lot of things that we've done have become like you can see this big pie chart of like, okay, if this happens, then do this, or if this happens, do that. And this pie chart goes, it looks like about a 10-fold octopus down here. There's so many ifs, this, do this. And I just think that a lot of things have to be simplified. I mean, I heard one team say, whatever you tell their driver, whatever you do, don't let them put that window net down.
That was Chase Briscoe, yeah.
Don't let them put that window net down, because that apparently is a sign that like you're done. The driver's okay, but we're done. And you know, the window net being up is a sign that like, okay, I need help. So that's a little conflict of interest there. Apparently, obviously Chase was okay and there wasn't anything medically wrong with him, but that gives the safety workers like, what are we supposed to do?
Right.
What do we do now? So anyway, I thought it was one of the little pile of things that like have made us look a little unprepared for the races, you know, to outside onlookers or maybe even our fans, our spectators thinking, what's going on here? Why don't we, somebody got to figure this out, because this looks like a little bit of a hog calling contest out here instead of a cup race. So I'm sure they'll work through it and see what they can come up with. But it aggravated me listening and watching it, you know, at home and saying, man, you know, and I don't know who's getting the good end of this. You know, people that got hauled to pit road and sat down and said, okay, we get a plan where as soon as the red flag's lifted, we're going to start working on our car. And then another playoff driver sitting over there stuck in the mud. There's no interliners in these tires by design. And that way, if you have a flat tire, you're on the rim. The thing won't roll no matter what.
Right.
So a lot of like, oh Lordy, what are we going to do type moment there. So anyway, we'll hopefully going forward, we'll see better results and maybe some changes that will head this type situation off at the pass.
There were continued court filings flying back and forth between NASCAR and 2311 Front Row Motorsports surrounding the lawsuit between the two. Chris, we talked about the lawsuit last week, so I don't want to get too much in the weeds in that, but maybe we could break down the charters, because that's really what is at the essence of this lawsuit, and why they are so important to Cup teams.
Well, the biggest thing is because the amount of money that the teams that have a charter, that own a charter, get. For instance, there's a huge difference just in the general payout of the races. If you have a charter, whether you finish 1st, 5th, 10th, 20th, 30th, or dead last, there's a huge difference in the payout that a charter team receives versus somebody who may be in the race without a charter, which there's not many of, but there's 3 or 4 that
BJ McLeod, for instance.
BJ McLeod's a good point right there. The amount of money he receives, the amount of purse money, and then there's also what I call plan money that is distributed to the chartered teams, and I think it's tiered by performance, your position in points or whatever. There's so much, the ones that are higher in the points, more successful, get more money basically to show up. An unchartered team gets none. So, and also the thing is too, if you're a chartered team, there's 36. You're guaranteed to make the race every time you go, no matter what, no matter how you qualify, no matter if you miss qualifying, no matter whether you qualify 10 seconds off the rest of the field or 1/1000th of a second off the last place car, you're in the race. And I can tell you from a crew chief standpoint, a team member standpoint, not an owner, but close to it, that's huge. If you go to the race and know that, like, okay, I'm in and I don't have to worry about this no matter what happens, worst case scenario, my car is starting the race, every single race. If you're not and you go and there's a couple of extra cars or some way you don't make the race, it's financially devastating. And also it's very, just the morale of your team is devastated. So those are some of the highlights of it. There's a lot of other probably details that we can't cover because we're not smart enough, but at least I'm not. She probably is, but it's a huge thing, and without it, man, you're on a real steep uphill battle.
For sure. By the way, you have forgotten more about racing than I'll ever know, so...
Forgotten being the key word there.
Just saying. It's there somewhere. This race at Charlotte this weekend at the Roval is the cutoff for the championship 12. The 8 racers will be alive after this week. The road course has also been reconfigured.
Yep.
So what do we expect this weekend, and how do these playoff drivers, because only one is safe because we've had 2 non-playoff winners, only William Byron is safe. How do the other 11 drivers approach this?
I'll tell you, this is, I don't know whether to call it, it's going to be a dogfight. It's going to be somewhat of a, I don't want to say carnival, that sounds negative, but it's kind of all the above of things like that. I think you're not going to know who's in and who's out until probably the checkered flag and maybe some time after of sorting. Here's the one thing that I look at, like my good friend of mine, Parker Kligerman, who is a excellent road racer, and he's involved, he's on kind of on the outside looking in for the Xfinity points. He brought this up to me the other day. He said, you know, there's going to be a little number of drivers, teams that are going to like point race. So you're going to like do everything you can.
I think if you're Denny Hamlin, that's how you approach this, because he's terrible on the road courses.
He is. And a couple of others aren't so great either.
Right.
But you try to point race, and that means like you make every effort you can to be in the top 10, 5, or however the best you can in both stages to get as many stage points as possible. Okay, so that you can make up a big gap. If you say you're 8 behind, for instance, say you're 8 out of the cutoff.
About Joey Logano, I think is 12 back.
Yeah, okay. Now, Joey Logano is not exactly a Mario Andretti road racer
No, but he's
either.
pretty good at the Roval.
Pretty good at the Roval. But you know, they're looking at like, okay, if I finish, say I finish 3rd and 6th in the stages, that might be enough points for him, and plus whatever he finishes in the race. Say he finishes 8th or 9th in the race, you know, he might accumulate enough points to be ahead of enough people to make it to the next round. Now, there's also some people like
Austin Cindric.
Austin Cindric is the best example. Thank you. On the Xfinity side, you got SVG and AJ Allmendinger is doing the same thing. There are guys that are like, hey, I'm a road course ringer. I'm one of the best people in this field, if not the best, at road courses. So I'm going to go out there and I'm going to do everything I can to win the race, because I think I can. Because if I win a race, I don't have to worry about any points. I'm automatically jumping to the next stage. And that means, as far as like strategy means, that they may, at least the second stage, they may, quote, flip the stage. They may come in, pit early, and give away stage points. You're saying, why would they do that? But they come in and pit early. On a road course, you can stay on the same lap. They pit 3, 4 laps before the end of the stage, right around. The stage happens. Everybody else comes in and pits. They don't. They stay out, and now they're up front. And now they control their own destiny for the end of the race. They can pit again when they want to. They'll drag the rest of the field, but they have control of the race because they're in front after the second stage. I think you're going to see a mixture of that type strategy within the Cup race on Sunday, and a lot of people maybe won't know that until the race gets going,
or at least till qualifying. Because I think qualifying might dictate, especially if you're like a Denny Hamlin or a Chase Elliott on the positive side, whether they point race or try to go for the win might depend on where they start.
Might depend on where they start, and they may not even know until it comes time to pit, because they may say, you know what, the only chance I got is to do the opposite of all the people in front of me. Because if I'm way behind, I'm not running very good, or I'm not running good enough to make my way in no matter what I do. If I do the same thing as everybody else, I'm just going to miss it and pat myself on the back and say, great job, but I'm going to miss it, I'm going to fail. So I may just have to be forced to do the opposite of all the people I'm trying to beat. So I think, you know, now you mentioned too, the reconfigured racetrack, there's a pretty, looks to me like anyway, a pretty challenging hairpin that comes back on the track, and I don't know. I feel like there's going to be a lot of people missing this hairpin, missing the corner. Lord help the ones who's on the outside of them if they miss it, because there's going to be a big wreck. And I think that it's going to take a lot of discipline, you know, to conquer this without making mistakes through the whole race. There's going to be a lot of pressure on these guys. There's going to be a pressure-packed, pressure-filled, anxious times for drivers, crew chiefs, race engineers, spotters that are not wanting to make a mistake, and also the pit crews. Everybody there, it's just going to be like, oh gosh, how can we be the ones that comes out as one of the top 8? And that's all they're worrying about. William Byron's got the only one he can sit back and say, I got it made. We're just going to cruise along. Yay.
But that's what makes it fun.
First of all, Tyler, thank you for joining us. Big weekend, home race for all the drivers. what's it like just to be able to race in Charlotte and sleep in your own bed and do all that kind of stuff? It's got to be a nice break from a long season.
Yeah, it's nice. I do enjoy getting to travel the country like we do, but it is certainly nice to sleep in your own bed, get out of bed, have a nice normal morning, and then roll on over to the racetrack for practice, qualifying, and then the race on Sunday.
The race at the Roval, it's obviously the track has been reconfigured slightly and a couple of the turns have changed. How do you guys prepare for that? Do you get extra sim time? How do you prepare for all the changes that have gone on at this track?
Yeah, typically when a change happens to a track, it's not in our backyards. We're not able to go see it. But as we've heard from, a lot of drivers and teams have been going over to the track, been able to get a look at it. I got to go take a look at it, look at it earlier this week as well. So, yeah, them opening that up for us to be able to do that is kind of nice because, typically when these changes happen, you don't really get to see them until you're there day of. So it was nice for us to be able to have an idea of what it kind of looks like. We know what it looks like in the simulation, but to see it in real life and get an idea of where everything is placed is good too. So yeah, certainly I'm curious to see how racing through that hairpin is going to be. But yeah, just the setup of that new section certainly changes up the flow of the race. It's now our slowest corner leading into our longest straightaway. So it's a very important part of the track.
So usually by Charlotte, something has been decided as far as the playoffs. There's been a couple of winners and maybe a couple of people already locked into the next round. But other than William, nobody is locked in. How wild, or maybe it won't be, maybe they'll have the exact opposite effect. But what is Charlotte going to be like for you drivers that are racing to get into the next round?
Yeah, you really just try to focus on your own event. For us, I think we kind of have an idea of what we need to score for points. So we have a goal like we would any other week. But yeah, looking at some of the drivers that are not within range, some of those that are kind of in range, definitely depending on how each of these teams' days goes could really shake things up as the race transpires. But I think for us, we go into practice and qualifying and just try to have a smooth Saturday. The better Saturday goes, the more options it gives us when we approach the race on Sunday. So, when to look ahead to that, to some degree, what the teams do around you can affect what your strategy might end up being. But say if we have a lot of good speed, it's kind of in our own hands, to be honest. But it will be interesting to see who around us in points banks on getting those stage points throughout their day, who around us just decides to go for the win. I think it's a pretty safe bet to go into this race. They're going to take 8 cars, as you mentioned. No one has won a race. Williams locked in on points. So I think there's a good number of us that are going to be mindful of points, but it's curious to see how far back it goes, right? You would think Chase Briscoe, maybe Cindric and Suarez in that spot where they would be heavily, motivated to just go for the win. If someone new wins that is below the cut, right, you need to be racing for 7th in points. So I think that's what our goal is going to be. Obviously, we'd love to win this race, but I think that hairpin just adds to the fact that something can happen late in this race you're not expecting. So we'll see how the race weekend goes, obviously, but I think we have a lot of options on how to advance.
You mentioned that the guys that are below the cut line, we were all 3 pretty good road racers, will probably just go for the win. But for the rest of you, you mentioned you have a points goal. Will your approach changes based on how practice and qualifying goes? I mean, because I think, track position, especially if you're racing for those first stage points, is kind of important.
Yeah, it really gives you the opportunity to do that. I think either way, I don't expect a lot of cars will be going for stage points. I do think a lot of the field will be racing the race heads up. There might be others throughout the field that are battling another car that might go for it, but I would not be surprised to see, majority of the field, if you will, 25 plus cars flip each stage to keep their track position. So I would think that means that a lot of us that go for those points will have the opportunity to do it. It's just a matter of, is it worth going for those stage points in each stage? And again, just as the weekend plays out, those answers will become more clear. But I think, it's going to be really hard to turn away, if you have the opportunity to turn away 20 points that are just laying out there. I think you have to take that very seriously.
You mentioned, we talked about no playoff drivers have won in this round of the playoffs, and there's 18 winners this year. Is there a thing as too much parity in the sport? I'm just saying that because there's been a lot of talk about maybe the sport doesn't have the stars that it used to have. And it feels like maybe that's partly because there's so much parity in the sport. And it's also, there's way more talent, right? I mean, there's way more guys that can win, but it just feels like, without a dominant driver, it's hard to maybe have the stars that we had when Earnhardt was winning everything or Gordon was winning everything. So I'm just wondering how you feel about that.
Yeah, I think when you look at how some of these races have played out, it definitely leans itself to more winners than we've had in other years. But I do feel like, yeah, I would say the talent of the field is pretty tight, but yeah, I think just how races have played out have allowed new winners or winners that haven't won in a while get back to victory lane. The speedway racing can be so unpredictable that it aids itself to having, winners that aren't repeat. Season as a whole, I think the way it's just played out, teams have really rose the occasion on those certain days. And I think that's what a lot of next gen racing is about.
For my final thought today, I want to talk a little bit more about the chaos. Not so much just in the microcosm of what happened at Talladega, but just in general. This year has been a little bit of pure chaos, from how many drivers and what drivers made the playoffs to some drivers starting the season very well and then starting falling off the map and then coming back in, and luck and craziness and insanity and all those things. Is it good for the sport? Well, it's a difficult question to answer because there's two sides of the story, right? Because from an entertainment value, what we love about March Madness is we don't have any idea ever what's going to happen in March Madness. I think just when you think, like a 16 seed has never beaten a 1 seed, UMBC says, hold my adult beverage. I'm going to knock off Virginia, the number 1 seed. So I think that's what we love about NASCAR right now. But also, I think that hurts NASCAR a little bit in the broader sense of there's no superstar right now. Now, just because there's a superstar does not mean that it's going to bring all this attention to the sport. Jimmy Johnson was a superstar, great dude, but he wasn't really the guy, even in his 7 championship runs, that brought a ton of attention to the sport. Even after 7 championships, half the people that called themselves sports fans couldn't even spell his name. Kyle and Kurt Busch were both stars. They both had their championship runs and their times of domination, but there were plenty of times where the national sports media couldn't tell the difference between the Kyle and the Kurt. So just because you have really dominant or really good drivers doesn't mean they're going to be superstars. But the sport certainly lacks that at the moment. We lack a Richard Petty or Dale Earnhardt or Jeff Gordon. And I think it's a time where we need that, right? Because you look at other sports and you see Patrick Mahomes, LeBron James, you see Aaron Judge. I hate even saying his name after what he did to my Royals this week, but you look around or Shohei Ohtani, you look at other sports and you see those big names and they're instantly recognizable, right? Even in tennis, you've had Serena or you've had Federer. In gymnastics over the summer, you had the pommel horse guy. Those kinds of superstars, even if they're just flash in the pans, like the pommel horse guy, they bring attention to the sport. And I don't know that NASCAR has that right now. I think there are lots of guys personality wise, that can pull that off, but they don't necessarily have the on-track success because of all the parity that makes them the whole package. So I'm a little bit torn on it. I definitely love the racing right now, how close it is, but I kind of wish that the superstar, even as a villain, the superstar would emerge in the sport. Thanks for joining us in the Backstretch. See you next week.